if we show you this is a young doctor who cannot work and he has decades in paycheck losses that total tens of millions of dollars, could you do it in your verdict? Or are you saying like, no? Hi everyone, this is Arkady Frekhtman. I'm a New York City personal injury trial attorney, and today I wanted to talk about a case that I watched on as a continuing legal education, and it was a very large settlement, actually verdict for the plaintiff. And I wanted to discuss some aspects of the case to see if there are any principles or themes that could be helpful for you and helpful for personal injury victims. So this case involved a 37-year-old plaintiff. And what happened was he was driving his car to work and he parked it in the parking garage. And usually he said that when I park my car in the parking garage, I then get out of my car, I get my stuff from the trunk, and then I walk to work. And the car just keeps going forward, and I'm behind the car, and it's safe for me to then go up the ramp and to my job. But on this occasion, the attendant got in the car, and after the plaintiff got his stuff and he's walking, the car suddenly reverses and it hits him. And it was at low speed, but it was bad enough that he had to go down on one knee, and all of a sudden he starts feeling pain. And the plaintiff was actually a 37-year-old doctor. He was a recent physician, so he goes to the hospital where he works, he gets checked out. It turns out that he has this thing known as a pars defect, so it's like a congenital issue. The pars are almost like in your spine, you have these things like these look like little fins that stick out, and one of them was fractured. Or there was a defect there, but that impact caused an aggravation of that pre-existing condition to the point where it was a very serious injury. So he starts treating, and he goes to doctors that he knows, doctors that he's worked with, doctors that he's worked with before. As the case plays out, the case is filed in the Bronx. And the plaintiff, by the way, he's an immigrant, but he came to New York when he was 16. He's from the Middle East. And so he's this recent doctor, he's actually an orthopedic doctor, so he knows about this type of injury. And so the defendants, what they do is they write up the case as low value. And then once the carrier does that, right, once they write up a case as low value, it's very hard to readjust that. It's very hard to settle it. So the only real thing you can do is go to trial. And so what happened here was that the plaintiff's attorney, he did a really good job. He was very thorough. He spent a lot of time preparing this case, and he actually found an expert who knows about physician compensation because the plaintiff couldn't work. And so this expert knew all about doctors, how they get paid and their productivity, and he was able to use that expert at trial. And so the defense was that this plaintiff was just a faker, that he could go back to work, that he was doing all this for financial gain. And one of the things that the plaintiff's attorney had to overcome was to prepare the plaintiff as well as the plaintiff's wife so they could testify effectively. And he said even spending, say, 9 hours preparing him to testify at trial would just be scratching the surface. So he had to really dive deeper and think about how this affects a person, how this affects a man. And there are certain things that he couldn't talk about because it was not really accepted to talk about certain things in his culture. And so he spent a day with a psychodrama expert, and they worked on almost like reenacting, like through theater and reenacting some of the things that are left unsaid, right? And psychodrama, I won't get into it here, but it's a field that some trial lawyers use. A lot of the trial lawyers work with psychodrama at the Trial Lawyers Conference. I believe it's out in Wyoming. They teach that, and there's a psychodrama teachers here in New York City. So he worked with one. And some of the techniques they use are things like mirroring, where you mirror someone else, and then the person says whether that's true or not, or doubling. So if the protagonist, the person that's the star of the psychodrama, right, the main character, is giving, like, say, a speech, the double would walk behind him or her and say something, and then whether that's true or not. And then another one is role reversal, where you would reverse roles with somebody. So say you're the injured plaintiff, and you say reverse roles, and then someone else becomes the injured plaintiff. So they kind of like, but you get into a lot of very deep issues when you do that. You really go to the heart of the issue that you might not be able to find otherwise. So that's one of the techniques he used. The other one was a focus group. So he did a focus group with Bronx jurors. It was by Zoom, but he did a simulated direct and a simulated cross-examination of the plaintiff, and he actually hired a trial attorney, a defense lawyer, to do a cross-examination of his client so he could see all of the issues that might come to light. And he actually let him really cross-examine the client thoroughly. And then you speak to the focus group members to see, hey, what's your opinion about this? Then whatever they say, then you know how to fix your case. So he really took that extra step on this case. And so he also went to the plaintiff's house, spent a lot of time with him, and he actually had a recorded direct and cross-examination using that former defense lawyer. He gave him all the materials, and he had that recorded. So that was always good for the prep too, because then you can go back to the recording and you can go over it with your client in preparing him. So in voir dire, there were certain issues, like, sometimes you have to do something known as polarize the case, right? So polarize the case basically means there are two polar extremes, kind of like the South Pole and the North Pole, right? And so you say, is my client a liar, a faker, and a fraud? Or is he just somebody who happened to get hit by a car and has this life-changing injury? And you're gonna have to figure out which one is true. Because the defendants, what they like to do is they like to hint at this, like lying and cheating and symptom magnification and all this stuff, but they don't like to come out and say it. But that's exactly the issue in the voir dire, in the jury selection, that the plaintiff's attorney dealt with. Things like faking, malingering. And he said, look, it was 3 surgeries that he ended up having by 2 different doctors, and they were saying they were unnecessary. But he's saying, look, I'm not trying to go to any kind of hired gun doctor. This is just doctors, 3 different doctors. They're all saying, I need this. And then the other thing that he really explored in jury selection was, he said, look, what do you think of large sums of money, such as tens of millions of dollars? If we show you this is a young doctor who cannot work and he has decades in paycheck losses that total tens of millions of dollars, could you do it in your verdict? Or are you saying, like, no, I couldn't do it under any circumstances, right? And then he obviously picked the jurors that could do that, and he was in the Bronx. And then he said it again in opening statement, that the defendants want this implicit bias. They don't want it out in the open. But he says you cannot let them hide in the shadows. So the verdict came down, and it was a large verdict. It was actually for $117 million. So the way the verdict played out was the future lost earnings, I believe, were $45 million, because he couldn't work. And he was a young doctor. He would have had his whole career ahead of him. The past pain and suffering was $9 million, and the future pain and suffering for 34 years was $51 million. Plus, I believe there was another $10 million for medical expenses. And it was a 5-1 verdict. And the one dissenter actually wanted to give more. I think he wanted to give more for medical expenses. So a really good verdict. And I believe with the CLE that I watched, they actually had some of the trial transcripts. So I'm gonna review that. And then if there's something interesting in there that I could share with you, we could do another video where we go over the trial transcripts and certain common lessons especially in the testimony of the plaintiff, because that's an important part that you wanna get right, and you wanna be able to prepare your client so that the defendant cannot cross-examine them effectively. And then if they do cross-examine them, whatever points they score, you want to be able to stand up on redirect and take care of those issues. But yeah, just looking over the summary, this is a summary of the case from the CLE, and they have the verdict sheet in here. From what I looked at so far, I think this is an amazing job, especially, Bronx is known as a good venue, but that's a really high verdict. And I think the trial attorney also is a member of the trial by human group that I'm in, that I've talked about before in some other videos. So he used some of those techniques. So congratulations, that's a great result. And let us know what questions you have and what other videos you want to see. Our goal is helping serious injury victims and families, and we are here for you.